The alien doctor mocked. The virus has no cure. The human girl shot her own vein to find one. The medical bay smelled wrong. Not wrong like a failed filter or a spilled solvent, wrong like meat left in a closed room. Dr. Kelroth's secondary stomach clenched before his mind caught up, a reflex from 43 cycles of treating the dying. He stopped between two recovery pods, his 6 head tendrils lifting from their exhausted droop to full alert. 217 dead. That was the number Ambassador Thrin had transmitted from Vidian 6, and the title had promised it. The alien doctor mocked. The virus has no cure. The human girl shot her own vein to find one. Kelroth had dismissed the transmission as grief-driven hyperbole. Humans were newcomers, soft-bodied. Enthusiastic, yes, but what could 60 years of FTL experience offer against a pathogen that had outlearned every treatment in the Galactic Federation's medical database? He wished he could tell you it ended there. It didn't. Stay close. 17 hours earlier, the sample canister had arrived from Harvest Prime. Dr. Venn had been the one to process it, 6 appendages moving across 3 workstations at once, her own tendrils trembling with a stress Kelroth had never seen in her before. The geometric structure is impossible, she said, not looking up from the holographic display. Every treatment we apply, it reconfigures within 18 hours, not mutates, reconfigures, like it remembers. Kelroth leaned over the display. The virus hung in the projection like a puzzle box made of protein, beautiful, symmetrical, and utterly alien to anything in 47 species of xenobiological study. It was too perfect, too targeted, the kind of thing that made a physician's tendrils go cold. The mortality rate. 93%. Venn's voice was flat. 500 infected on Meridian's Hope alone. The rest of the sector will follow within the week. Kelroth stared at the numbers. The rule was absolute. Galactic medical databases contained every known treatment. The rule was absolute. Quarantine protocols contained every previous outbreak. The rule was absolute. Species with robust physiologies survived. Fragile newcomers perished. The rule was absolute, and it was breaking. He reached for the carafe at the edge of the workstation and poured a half cup of water he did not drink. Then he touched the panel, and the 6th treatment protocol loaded. The virus reconfigured before the simulation finished running. Across the medical bay, a comm unit chimed. Ambassador Thrin's scaled face filled the screen, tail twitching with the irritation that Vix used to mask fear. Earth has offered a specialist, Thrin said, a human. Kelroth's tendrils flattened in skepticism, a human. She arrives in 6 hours. Humans are soft-bodied. Their medical technology is 60 years behind the Federation standard. What could they possibly? They offered, Thrin interrupted, and the tail twitch stopped. Unasked, the transmission came before we requested aid. They already knew. Kelroth said nothing. The wrong smell in the bay seemed to deepen, as if the pathogen itself were listening. 6 hours later, the decontamination lock cycled open with a hiss of equalizing pressure. Maya Reeves stepped through, and Kelroth felt his first assumption shatter. She was smaller than expected. Compact, soft-bodied, yes, but her eyes moved across the medical bay with an analytical precision that reminded him of a predator scanning terrain. She carried a container that steamed faintly, and the smell that reached him was bitter and sharp. Coffee, she said, catching his tendril position. A stimulant, want some? It smells toxic. It is, that's the point. She set the container down and turned to the holographic display without waiting for permission. For a long moment, she was silent. Then she laughed, a short, sharp sound that made Venn's appendages freeze mid-motion. Beautiful, Maya said, in a terrifying sort of way. You find mass death beautiful. I find the engineering beautiful. She pointed at the protein coat. This isn't random mutation. It's mimicry. The virus wears a disguise that matches each species' cell markers. That's why your treatments fail. You're not fighting one pathogen. You're fighting a shapeshifter that learns your immune system's language faster than you can learn its. Kelroth felt something shift in his secondary stomach. You speak as if you understand it. I understand the type. Maya turned to face him, and her expression was not the fear he expected. It was something closer to recognition. My species didn't evolve in clean rooms, Doctor. We evolved in filth, in swamps and plague pits and cities where the water killed as many as the wars. Every pathogen you can name, something like it tried to wipe us out, and we are still here. She reached into her pack and withdrew a medical injector. The chamber was loaded with pale blue fluid, millions of viral particles suspended in saline. Kelroth's tendrils shot to full alarm. What is that? A sample from the active culture. Maya's voice was casual, as if she were discussing whether. I propose we infect me with it, use my body as the laboratory. The silence in the medical bay was absolute. Even the ventilation seemed to stop. That is, Kelroth began. Insane, probably. Maya shrugged, a gesture of casual acceptance that seemed wildly inappropriate given the situation. But your databases are failing, your protocols are failing, and in 6 more hours, another colony will start dying. I gave myself maybe 60% odds, and that was being optimistic. But someone has to try, so I will. Ven's appendages trembled. The diplomatic consequences if she dies. Earth already authorized the mission, Maya said. Full waiver, my signature, their seal. She held up the injector. Your choice, Doctor, but the clock is running. Kelroth looked at the virus on the display. He looked at the small human standing before him with an injector in her hand and coffee cooling on his workstation. He thought of 217 dead on Vidian 6 and the 500 still breathing on his own ship, and the rule that was supposed to be absolute. Then, he said, prepare the isolation chamber. Maya smiled. It was not a happy expression. Good. Now do you have a stronger coffee? The next few hours are going to be unpleasant. She did not ask again. She simply walked toward the isolation chamber, the injector loose in her hand, her stride steady as if she were heading to a lunch break rather than a deliberate infection with a 93% fatal pathogen. Kelroth followed, his tendrils swaying in a configuration he had never learned in medical school, the posture of a being who had just watched something impossible begin. The chamber sealed behind them with a sound like a held breath. Maya sat on the isolation cot and rolled up her sleeve. The chamber's walls were transparent polymer, and beyond them, Kelroth could see Ven's 6 appendages poised over monitoring stations, her tendrils flat with tension. The injector gleamed in the overhead light. Recording, Maya asked. Everything, Ven said. Vitals, cellular imaging, antibody markers, full spectrum. Good, because if this works, you'll want to study every second. And if it doesn't, Maya shrugged, that same casual gesture that seemed to belong to another species entirely. Well, then you'll know exactly how a human dies. Kelroth's secondary stomach clenched again. You are certain? No, she pressed the injector to her forearm, but I'm here. The hiss was soft. The pale blue fluid vanished into her vein. Maya set the empty injector on the cot beside her and lay back, folding her hands across her stomach like someone preparing for sleep. For a moment, nothing happened. Then her eyes widened. Fever, she said, and her voice was already hoarse. That's good. That's my body turning up the heat. Kelroth checked the readouts. Her temperature climbed fast, first a low fever, then higher, then past the danger line. The virus was not wasting time. On the cellular display, viral particles attached to her cell membranes like tiny grappling hooks, boring through, injecting their genetic payload. The geometric puzzle box was opening inside her. Hour 1, Ven announced. Viral load increasing, no immune response detected. It's there, Maya said. Her face was flushed, sweat gathering at her hairline. Just watching, learning its shape. We don't attack what we don't understand. Kelroth stared at the display. The virus had reconfigured twice already, adapting to the cellular environment. In every other species, this was the moment the immune system collapsed, overwhelmed, outpaced, converted into viral factories. But Maya's cells were not converting. They were dying, deliberately, apoptosing before the virus could use them. Sacrifice, Kelroth whispered. Your cells are killing themselves rather than serve as hosts. Better to lose a finger than a hand, Maya's teeth chattered. Better to lose a hand than an arm. We learned that a long time ago. Hour 2, her temperature hit the peak. The virus tried a new configuration, a protein coat that mimicked human cell markers more precisely. On the display, Maya's immune cells paused, analyzed, then released a flood of antibodies that did not match the old configuration. They matched the new one. Impossible, Ven said. Her immune response is outpacing the viral mutation rate. Not impossible. Maya's voice was slurred, but her eyes were bright. Just older than your medicine, we are walking libraries of immunological warfare. Every plague that ever killed us left a note in our blood. We carry the memory of 10,000 extinct diseases. Hour 3, the viral population plateaued. Kelroth watched the curve flatten on the display, his tendrils frozen in a posture he had no name for, not alarm, not hope, something between. Maya's fever held steady at its peak. Her immune cells were not just fighting, they were hunting. Antibodies swarmed each viral particle, neutralizing, tagging, calling in larger cells to devour the remains. The virus is learning, Kelroth said, but so is she. Maya laughed, a wet, ragged sound. That's the thing about evolution, Doctor. It doesn't care about being fair. It only cares about being last. Hour 4, the fever broke. Maya's temperature dropped in a steep descent, down, then lower, then back to normal. She sat up, shivering, and asked for water. Ven brought it, 2 appendages trembling so badly she nearly spilled the cup. How do you feel? Kelroth asked. Like I lost a fight and won a war. Maya drank, her hands steady despite the tremor in her shoulders. The virus is still in there, but it's losing. Every move it makes, my blood already has the counter. Hour 6, 0 detectable viral particles. Kelroth checked the readouts 3 times. Then he checked them again. The chamber that should have held a dying human instead held a woman sitting upright, pale but alert, rolling down her sleeve as if she had just finished a routine vaccination. The synthesis, Maya said. We have 2 days to turn my blood into a cure for the 500 still breathing, and for every colony in the sector. Kelroth's tendrils rose slowly into respect configuration. You knew this would work. I knew it could. Maya stood and her legs held. The scariest part, this was not even particularly creative by human standards. We've survived worse, much worse. The next 2 days blurred into a frenzy of synthesis and testing. Maya worked in long cycles, fueled by coffee that made Ven's olfactory receptors ache. She drew vial after vial of her own antibody-rich blood, guiding the synthesis of compatible treatments for Calorian, Vic, and a dozen other species. The first critical patient, a Calorian miner from the mining colony, showed improvement within half a day. The mortality rate began to drop. But not for everyone. On the observation deck, Maya stood at the railing and watched the recovery pods below. She counted them. Then she counted the empty ones. Her shrug was smaller now, weighted with something Kelroth was beginning to recognize as grief. How many? He asked. Most survived. She did not look at him, but not all. You saved hundreds of lives. Tell that to the families of those who didn't make it. She turned, and her eyes were dry but hollow. The cure reached them too late, or their bodies were too far gone, or the virus had already learned something new. Every saved life carries the weight of those lost in the delay. Kelroth said nothing. He thought of his own medical training, the certainty of protocols, the absolute rules that had governed his long career. He thought of a human who had infected herself with a fatal pathogen because someone had to try and the rules were not enough. There is something else, Maya said. She pulled a data tablet from her pack. I ran the genetic markers while you were synthesizing. The virus is not natural. Kelroth's tendrils flattened. Explain. Junk DNA segments, sequences that serve no biological purpose but carry signatures, manufacturing codes, batch identifiers, proprietary markers. She turned the tablet. The display showed genetic strings highlighted in crimson. This is engineered complexity, Doctor. Natural evolution produces pathogens that are effective. This thing is too perfect, too targeted. It was built in a lab. Where's Research Station Epsilon? Maya's voice was flat. Neutral space, no Federation oversight, pharmaceutical corporations operating in the gray zones. Kelroth felt the deck tilt beneath him, the Epsilon Consortium. He had heard the name in medical circles, whispered, never confirmed. A cartel that profited from disease. Create the pathogen, sell the cure, control the price. New outbreaks, Maya said, across many systems, all in the last few days. This wasn't an accident, it was a test. They were testing variants on civilian populations. The observation deck seemed to shrink. The stars outside the viewport were not distant enough. Kelroth thought of the dead on the mining colony, the infected on Meridian's Hope, the colonies he had not yet heard from, all of them data points in a corporate experiment. We need to expose them, he said. We need to get inside. Maya's smile returned, but it was not the same smile she had worn in the medical bay. This one was sharp and cold. Their database holds the evidence, manufacturing records, communication logs, financial trails. We get that data, we broadcast it to every channel in the sector. Station Epsilon is a fortress. Fortresses have supply lines. Maya pulled up a schematic. Cargo vessel departs regularly, medical supplies, food stores, equipment, we hide in the containers. That is insane, she shrugged, and this time the gesture was not casual. It was armor, probably, but someone has to try, Doctor, and the clock is still running. Kelroth looked at the schematic. He looked at the woman who had just survived a deliberate infection and was already planning to infiltrate a corporate fortress. He thought of the empty pods and the rules that had failed them and the absolute that was no longer absolute. Then, he said into the comm, acquire whatever sensor dampening technology your channels can provide. We are going to need it. The supply vessels smelled of recycled coolant and synthetic protein. Kelroth lay curled in a medical container between crates of surgical equipment, his 6 tendrils pressed flat against his skull to fit the tight space. Beside him, Maya breathed in slow, measured cycles, the human trick of appearing calm when every nerve demanded action. Ven had remained behind on Meridian's Hope, running interference on the comm channels, her sensor dampeners creating ghosts in the station's detection grid. How long? Kelroth whispered. Until docking, not long. Maya's eyes were closed, but her fingers drummed a rhythm against her thigh. The hard part comes after. Their security runs on biometric scanners. Calorian physiology won't match any registered profile. Then how do we? We don't match, we bypass. She opened her eyes and held up a small device, something Ven had acquired through channels Kelroth chose not to inquire about. Sensor Ghost projects a maintenance worker signature over our real readings. Won't hold under deep scan, but it doesn't need to. We just need to reach the central database. The vessel shuddered. Docking clamps engaged with a metallic groan that vibrated through the container walls. Maya's drumming stopped. She became very still, the way a predator becomes still before striking. Remember, she said, walk like you belong, look at the floor, not the cameras, and if anyone speaks to you, let me answer. They waited for the cargo bay to empty, then they moved. Research Station Epsilon was a maze of corridors lit by harsh white panels that gave no shadow to hide in. The walls were bare metal, the floors scuffed by years of supply carts. It looked like any medical facility in the Federation, sterile, functional, forgettable. That was the point. No one would suspect a bioweapons cartel of operating from a place that looked like a community clinic. Maya walked ahead, her stride casual, her eyes on the floor. Kelroth followed, forcing his tendrils into a relaxed droop that felt like a lie. They passed a Vic security officer whose tail flicked with boredom, not suspicion. They passed a maintenance worker who nodded at Maya's projected signature without really seeing her. They turned a corner, then another, descending through levels that grew warmer and more humid the deeper they went. The database is 3 levels below the public floors, Maya murmured. Private research wing. No workers, no maintenance schedules, just automated patrols. And the pathogens? Locked in containment, unless someone opens them, She glanced at him, and her smile was thin and sharp. "Which we won't." They reached a sealed door marked with symbols Kelroth did not recognize, corporate identifiers, not Federation standard. Maya pressed Ven's device against the access panel. The lock cycled with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the empty corridor. The room beyond was a cathedral of data. Rows of server towers hummed in the red glow of emergency lighting. At the center, a single terminal faced the door, its screen dark and waiting. Maya moved to the terminal and plugged in a portable drive. Her fingers flew across the interface, pulling files, decrypting layers, downloading everything. Kelroth watched the door, his tendrils rising with each distant sound. "Manufacturing records," Maya said, "communication logs, financial trails, they documented everything. Arrogance of profit, Doctor, they never thought anyone would get this far." "How long?" 2 minutes, maybe 3. She did not look up. "The data is enormous. They tested variants on civilian populations across the sector, documented the results, adjusted the next batch based on mortality curves. This wasn't just a cartel, it was a research program." Kelroth felt his secondary stomach twist. He thought of the empty pods on Meridian's Hope. He thought of the mining colony, the agricultural worlds, the colonies that had burned while these servers hummed and recorded their deaths as data points. A sound from the corridor, footsteps, multiple sets moving fast. Maya's fingers did not pause. "How many?" 4, maybe 5. Kelroth's voice was tight. "They know. They suspect there's a difference." She tapped one final command. The drive chirped "Download complete." She yanked it free and turned to face the door, her hand moving to the device on her belt. "Get behind the server towers. Now." Kelroth obeyed. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped. The door hissed open. A Vic security commander entered first, military bearing, cold optics, armor that gleamed in the red light. Behind him, 3 more officers fanned out, weapons drawn. They looked at the terminal, then at Maya standing alone in the center of the room. "Unauthorized access," the commander said. His voice was flat, bureaucratic, the sound of someone who had said these words many times. "Step away from the equipment." Maya smiled. It was the same sharp smile she had worn on the observation deck, the one that made Kelroth's tendrils go cold. Of course. She stepped away from the terminal. She also pressed the button on her belt. Alarms screamed, not the soft chirp of an intrusion alert, the catastrophic wail of biological containment breach. Red lights strobed across the room. The server towers flickered. Every screen in the facility flashed the same warning: pathogen release detected, atmospheric contamination critical. The security officers froze. The commander's tail shot, rigid with panic. "What did you do?" "Released water vapor," Maya said. "Harmless, but your sensors can't tell the difference." She moved, not toward the door, toward the secondary access hatch in the far wall, the one she had spotted on the schematic and never mentioned. Kelroth scrambled after her, his tendrils streaming behind him in full alarm. Behind them, the security team was already scrambling for protective gear, shouting into comm units, their weapons forgotten on the floor. The hatch sealed behind them. They ran through corridors filling with decontamination foam, bulkheads sealing automatically, the station's own safety protocols becoming their escape route. Maya ran with the easy stride of someone who had done this before, who had planned not just the entry but the exit, who had known exactly which buttons to press and which doors would unlock in the chaos. They reached the supply bay with seconds to spare. The vessel was still docked, its crew evacuated by the same false alarm that had cleared their path. Maya hit the emergency release, and the clamps disengaged with a shudder that threw Kelroth against a cargo crate. The stars wheeled past the viewport as the vessel spun away from the station, free and accelerating. Maya slumped against the wall, the drive clutched in her hand, and laughed, a wild, breathless sound that was half relief and half fury. "Did you see their faces? You released water vapor. I released confusion. If you cannot kill the enemy, you confuse it. You make yourself an unappealing target." She held up the drive, "And we got everything." Kelroth stared at the small human who had just turned a corporate fortress inside out with a cup of water and a smile. His tendrils slowly settled into a configuration he had never used before, not respect, not alarm, something that had no name in the Calorian emotional vocabulary. "You planned this," he said. "From the moment you proposed the infection, you knew we would end up here." "I hoped," Maya's smile faded. "Planning is what you do when you have time. Humans don't always have time. We just show up and figure it out." She moved to the vessel's comm array and inserted the drive. Her fingers hesitated over the broadcast controls. For a moment, she was silent. Then she looked at Kelroth, and her eyes were not sharp anymore. They were tired, old in a way that had nothing to do with years. "Once I send this," she said, "there's no going back. The cartel will fall, but the fallout will hit the whole sector. Pharmaceutical corporations, medical suppliers, research grants, the whole system is tangled together. Exposing this means pulling on a thread that doesn't stop." "Then pull it." She pressed the button. The broadcast went out on every channel: manufacturing records, communication logs, financial trails, the names of colonies that had been test sites, the names of researchers who had designed the variants, the names of executives who had approved the budgets. It was not a leak, it was a flood. Maya sat back and watched the transmission counterclimb. The scariest part, this was not even particularly creative by human standards. "What do you mean?" "This cartel, they thought they were clever, engineered plagues, corporate profits, neutral space legal shields." She shook her head. "Humans have been running that playbook on each other for centuries. We invented this. We just got better at stopping it." The transmission completed. Maya stood and moved to the viewport, watching Station Epsilon shrink to a point of light against the dark. Her shoulders were straight, but Kelroth saw the tremor in her hands. The infection had taken more than she admitted. The 2 days of synthesis had taken more. And now this, the weight of a sector's worth of consequences resting on a single broadcast. "What happens now?" he asked. Now she did not turn. "Now the Federation Council requests me as a permanent consultant. Now they offer me a title, an office, a budget. Now they ask me to teach them what I know. Will you accept?" Maya was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft. "I have a better idea." The Federation Council chamber was a dome of polished stone and holographic light, filled with representatives from species Kelroth had spent his career studying. Vix with gleaming scales, Calorians with tendrils coiled in formal respect configurations, species he did not recognize, newcomers from the far rim, all of them watching the small human at the center of the floor. Maya stood before the council with her hands clasped behind her back, the posture of a soldier at ease rather than a petitioner seeking approval. She had not asked for this hearing. The council had summoned her after the broadcast, after the Epsilon Consortium's executives had been arrested in 7 systems, after the pharmaceutical corporations had begun scrambling to distance themselves from the fallout. "I appreciate the offer," she said, "but I have a counter-proposal." She reached into her pack and withdrew a data tablet, not the one from the station, a new one, filled with schematics and training protocols, and something she had worked on during the return journey while Kelroth slept, and then monitored the comm channels. "The Xenopathogen Response Initiative," Maya said, "a permanent training program, medical personnel from every species learning human immunological approaches, not because humans are better, because we're different, because we survived things your species never had to face, and that difference is a weapon." The chamber murmured, tendrils shifted, scales rippled. "You want us to adopt human medical practices?" a Calorian delegate asked, tendrils flattening in skepticism that reminded Kelroth painfully of himself days ago. "I want you to understand them." Maya's voice was steady. "Your medicine is centuries old, built on institutional knowledge and careful protocols. That works for known diseases, but engineered pathogens don't play by known rules. They learn, they adapt, they turn your strengths into vulnerabilities." She paused. Her hand moved to her forearm, where the injector had left a faint mark, the only physical scar from her deliberate infection. What saved those patients wasn't my blood. It was my willingness to try something your protocols said was impossible. Stubborn optimism, Dr. Kelroth called it. He was right. Refusal to accept impossible is itself a technology, and it can be taught. Kelroth felt his tendrils rise slowly into a configuration he had never used in public before, the posture of open acknowledgement, of a physician admitting that a newcomer had shown him something his own traditions could not. The council voted, not unanimously, the Vic chair being abstained, bureaucratic caution die hard, but overwhelmingly. The Xenopathogen Response Initiative was authorized, training facilities established on Meridian's Hope and 3 other stations, medical personnel from a dozen species enrolled in the first class. Maya taught them, not from lectures, from demonstration. She showed them how human immune cells analyzed before attacking, how sacrifice could be a strategy, how the same species that created monsters could also create the tools to dismantle them. 5 years later, Kelroth stood in the observation deck of the newly expanded training facility and watched her work with a class of 11 species medical responders. Her hair showed traces of gray now, the cost of the infection and the long cycles and the weight she carried. But her hands were steady as she demonstrated antibody synthesis, and her eyes still held the analytical precision of a predator scanning terrain. "She has not accepted the permanent consultant position," Ambassador Thrin said, joining him at the railing. The Vic's scales had dulled with age, but his tail still twitched with the same irritation-masked concern Kelroth remembered. "She refuses every promotion, every title. She doesn't want them." Kelroth watched Maya demonstrate a cellular response to a young Calorian trainee, her tendrils trembling with the effort of concentration. "She wants to keep showing up. That's the whole point." "The point of what?" Kelroth thought of the medical bay, the wrong smell, the absolute rule that had broken. He thought of the empty pods, the ones who had not made it, the families Maya had spoken of with dry, hollow eyes. He thought of the shrug that had seemed so inappropriate in the isolation chamber, and how he now understood it was not casual at all. "The point," he said, "is that someone has to try." Below, the class ended. The trainees dispersed, chattering in half a dozen languages, their tendrils and tails and appendages moving with the energy of young beings who had not yet learned what could not be done. Maya gathered her materials and turned toward the exit. She passed a trainee who asked a question, stopped, answered it with a gesture that made the young Calorian's tendrils rise in sudden understanding. Then she moved on. Her stride was the same as it had been in the decontamination lock, in the isolation chamber, in the corridors of Station Epsilon, steady, unhurried, the walk of someone heading to a lunch break rather than a war. But Kelroth saw the tremor in her hand as she pushed through the door. The cost had not gone away. It had simply become part of her. He found her later on the observation deck, alone, watching the stars. She did not turn when he approached, but her shoulders relaxed, the smallest acknowledgement that she had expected him. "The outbreak on the Krell colony," she said, "contained in 18 hours. The trainees handled it without me. I trained them to be braver than me." She was silent for a moment. The Krell pathogen was a new variant, engineered, of course. Someone always tries again. The war doesn't end. "No," Kelroth stood beside her, "but now we have soldiers." Maya laughed, a short, quiet sound, nothing like the wild, breathless laugh of the escape vessel. "Soldiers, is that what we are?" "You are," he turned to face her. "I was wrong about you, about humans. I thought you were soft-bodied newcomers with nothing to offer. I thought your enthusiasm was naivety. I thought your stubbornness was a flaw. And now I think," he stopped. His tendrils settled into respect configuration, and he let them stay there. "Now I think impossible simply meant nobody had been brave enough to try yet." Maya looked at him. For a moment, her eyes were dry and hollow, the same grief he had seen on the observation deck counting empty pods. Then she shrugged. It was a smaller shrug now, weighted with the ones she had not saved, the outbreaks that had come too late, the variants still being engineered in labs that had not yet been found. But it still meant the same thing. Someone had to try, so she did. She turned back to the viewport. The stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the wars fought in their light. Below, the next class of trainees gathered in the training bay, their voices rising through the decks, young and loud and certain of everything. Maya watched them. Her hand moved to the faint scar on her forearm. She did not speak. She simply stood there, small and soft-bodied and still standing, while the galaxy turned around her and the next impossible thing waited to be tried.